Black Maid solves a $400 million problem in front of the CEO, and ends up turning the whole company upside down. The vacuum cleaner hummed like a dying animal as Vanessa Harris pushed it across the marble floors of the 32nd floor. At 11:47 p.m., Rothworks Technologies was supposed to be empty, but tonight the boardroom blazed with light, and angry voices leaked through the supposedly soundproof glass walls. Vanessa had cleaned these floors for 3 years. 3 years of invisible nights, wiping away the fingerprints of millionaires who wouldn't remember her face if their lives depended on it. She knew every coffee stain, every scuff mark, every corner where the day shift executives dropped their secrets along with their trash. Tonight felt different. Through the glass, she could see 6 figures hunched around the massive oak table. CEO Daniel Roth paced like a caged tiger, his silver hair disheveled, his usually pristine suit wrinkled. The others, men and women in expensive suits who normally radiated confidence, looked like they were watching their world collapse in real time. Vanessa shouldn't have been able to hear them. The boardroom was designed to contain secrets worth billions. But the custodial closet shared a ventilation shaft with the conference room, and sound traveled in ways the architects never intended. The algorithm is completely fried. A woman's voice carried through the vents. Vanessa recognized it as Dr. Lena Briggs, the chief technology officer who treated the cleaning staff like furniture. 3 months of work, $400 million in development costs, and we're back to square one. How is that possible? Roth's voice cracked with frustration. We hired the best minds in Silicon Valley. We poached talent from Google, Microsoft, Apple. How does a predictive AI system just break? Vanessa paused her cleaning, curiosity overriding caution. She'd heard whispers about Project Phoenix, Rothworks' attempt to create an AI that could predict market trends with supernatural accuracy. If it worked, it would revolutionize everything from stock trading to supply chain management. If it failed, the neural network keeps crashing during the pattern recognition phase, another voice explained. Vanessa recognized James Kellerman, the lead engineer. Every time we feed it new data, it processes for about 12 minutes, then completely shuts down. We've run diagnostics, rebuilt the core architecture twice, even brought in external consultants. Nothing works. Vanessa found herself moving closer to the ventilation grate, her cleaning cart forgotten. In another life, before her father's medical bills, before she dropped out of MIT 3 credits shy of her computer science degree, she would have been sitting at that table. Instead, she was listening through air ducts like some corporate spy. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9, Roth said, his voice heavy with defeat. If we don't have answers, they're pulling the plug. $400 million down the drain, and half our stock value with it. Sir? A younger voice spoke up, Ethan Cole, the junior engineer who was always polite to the cleaning staff. What if the problem isn't with the algorithm itself? What if it's the data pre-processing? Lena's laugh was sharp and bitter. Ethan, we've been coding since before you were born. The pre-processing is fine. The problem is that we're trying to teach a machine to predict human behavior, and humans are fundamentally unpredictable. Vanessa almost snorted. She caught herself just in time, pressing her hand to her mouth. But she couldn't stop the words from forming in her mind. Of course humans seem unpredictable when you're only looking at surface patterns. Her mind wandered back to her senior project at MIT, before everything fell apart. She'd been working on emotional sentiment analysis in financial decision-making. The key insight that had excited her professors was simple. People weren't just rational actors responding to market forces. They were emotional beings whose decisions were influenced by everything from the weather to what they'd eaten for breakfast. But traditional AI models tried to find patterns in the decisions themselves, not the emotional states that drove those decisions. It was like trying to predict the weather by studying only the movement of clouds, while ignoring atmospheric pressure, temperature, and humidity. What about emotional weighting? Ethan's voice carried a note of desperation. Maybe we need to factor in sentiment analysis beyond just market data. We tried that, James replied wearily. Added Twitter sentiment, news analysis, even weather data. The model just became more unstable. Vanessa shook her head silently. They were thinking about it all wrong. You couldn't just add emotional data on top of a rational model. You had to build the emotional framework into the core architecture, let it inform every decision tree and neural pathway. She moved away from the grate and resumed cleaning, but her mind was racing. The vacuum cleaner provided cover as she worked through the problem. She could visualize the code structure they were probably using: clean, logical, and completely blind to the messy reality of human psychology. The voices in the boardroom grew more heated. Stock prices were mentioned. Layoffs. The possibility of Rothworks losing its position as the third largest tech company in America. Vanessa finished cleaning the outer office and moved toward the supply closet to store her equipment. But she couldn't shake the solution that was crystallizing in her mind. It was elegant, simple, and completely different from what those brilliant minds in the boardroom were considering. She shouldn't care. These people had never cared about her. She was invisible to them, a black woman in a custodian's uniform, as relevant to their world as the furniture she polished. They wouldn't listen to her even if she tried to speak up. They'd probably call security. But the problem was beautiful in its complexity, and Vanessa had always been drawn to beautiful problems. In the supply closet, she found a napkin from the executive break room, the fancy kind with the Rothworks logo embossed in gold. Using a pen from her cleaning cart, she began to write. The solution flowed out of her like water. Not the full code, that would take weeks, but the conceptual framework. A hybrid architecture that treated emotional processing not as an add-on but as the foundation. Neural networks that could weight rational data through emotional filters, creating predictions that accounted for the full spectrum of human decision-making. She wrote quickly, her handwriting cramped but legible. Mathematical notation mixed with plain English explanations. The core algorithm that could save Project Phoenix. When she finished, Vanessa stared at the napkin. 3 years of cleaning these floors, and she just solved a $400 million problem in 10 minutes. The boardroom had gone quiet. Through the glass, she could see the executives gathering their papers with the defeated posture of people who'd run out of options. Roth stood at the head of the table, staring out at the city lights as if they might hold answers he couldn't find. Vanessa folded the napkin and slipped it into the breast pocket of her uniform. She'd throw it away when she got home. No point in keeping a reminder of the life she could have had. But as she wheeled her cleaning cart toward the elevator, something made her stop. Maybe it was the memory of her MIT professors encouraging her to think bigger. Maybe it was the knowledge that good people like Ethan would lose their jobs if Project Phoenix failed. Maybe it was just 3 years of being invisible finally wearing on her soul. She pulled out the napkin, smoothed it flat, and placed it on the polished boardroom table where Daniel Roth had been sitting, right next to his empty coffee cup and his forgotten reading glasses. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft ding. Vanessa descended into the night, carrying her invisible genius with her, never imagining that a simple napkin would soon turn the most powerful tech company in America upside down. Daniel Roth hadn't slept. At 6:30 a.m., he sat in his corner office nursing his 4th cup of coffee, watching Rothworks stock plummet in pre-market trading. Down 18% and falling. The board meeting was in 2.5 hours, and he had nothing, no solutions, no explanations, just the bitter taste of impending failure. His assistant had left a stack of incident reports on his desk, including security footage from the previous night's emergency meeting. Roth rarely bothered with surveillance reviews, but something nagged at him. He'd left his reading glasses in the boardroom, and when he'd returned at midnight to retrieve them, he could have sworn the table looked different. He pulled up the security feed on his monitor, fast-forwarding through empty hallways until he reached the boardroom footage. There, 11:52 p.m., just after his team had left. The cleaning woman entered with her cart, the same one he'd seen 1,000 times but never really noticed. She moved efficiently around the room, wiping down surfaces, emptying trash bins. Roth was about to skip ahead when something made him pause. The woman had stopped at his chair, pulled something from her pocket, and placed it on the table. She stood there for a moment, as if reconsidering, then walked away. "What the hell?" Roth muttered, zooming in on the timestamp. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the boardroom. The 32nd floor was empty except for the early shift security guard. Roth used his keycard to enter the boardroom and immediately spotted what the cleaning woman had left: a simple white napkin, folded once, sitting exactly where his coffee cup had been. He unfolded it carefully, expecting maybe a note about a broken fixture or a schedule change. Instead, he found something that made his hands tremble. Mathematical equations filled the napkin in cramped handwriting. Neural network architecture diagrams. Variable definitions. And at the bottom, in clear English, emotional sentiment weighting needs to be core framework, not add-on. Try recursive emotional memory loops with 72-hour decay patterns. Roth read it 3 times before the implications hit him. Someone, the cleaning woman, had understood their $400 million problem well enough to propose a solution. And not just any solution. This was elegant, sophisticated, completely different from anything his team had considered. His first instinct was to dismiss it. A janitor couldn't possibly understand quantum algorithms and predictive modeling. But the math was solid. The notation was precise. And desperate times called for desperate measures. 20 minutes later, Roth burst into the engineering lab where James Kellerman was running yet another failed diagnostic. "James, I need you to try something," Roth said, handing over the napkin. Kellerman squinted at the handwriting. "Sir, where did this come from?" "Just try it. Please. As a favor to me." Kellerman looked skeptical but gathered his team. Ethan Cole leaned over the napkin, his eyes widening. "This is actually brilliant. Look at this approach to emotional weighting. It's treating sentiment as a core neural pathway instead of a data overlay. Can we implement it?" Roth asked. "Give us 2 hours," James said, already moving toward his workstation. Roth spent those 2 hours pacing his office, fielding angry calls from board members, and watching the stock price continue its nosedive. At 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the board meeting, his phone rang. "Sir?" James's voice was barely controlled excitement. "You need to get down here. Now." Roth ran to the engineering lab. On the main monitor, Project Phoenix was running smoothly. Data flowed through the neural networks like water, patterns emerging and predictions generating with stunning accuracy. The system that had crashed every 12 minutes for 3 months was now processing complex market scenarios without a hiccup. "How?" Roth whispered. "The emotional memory loops," Ethan explained, his face flushed with excitement. "Instead of treating human behavior as irrational noise, the system now processes it as emotional information with predictive value. It's like teaching the AI to understand not just what people do, but why they feel compelled to do it." By noon, Rothworks stock had not only stopped falling but gained back 8%. The business media was calling it a miraculous turnaround. The board meeting had turned from a funeral into a celebration. But Roth couldn't celebrate. He kept staring at the napkin, wondering who had written it. That afternoon, he called the head of building services. "I need information about your night shift cleaning crew. Specifically, whoever cleans the 32nd floor. That would be Vanessa Harris." The supervisor replied. "Been with us 3 years. Reliable, quiet, never any problems. I need her personnel file." An hour later, Roth sat in stunned silence reading Vanessa's employment records. High school valedictorian. Full scholarship to MIT. Computer science major with a focus on artificial intelligence and behavioral modeling. Dropped out in her senior year, no explanation given. He pulled up her cleaning schedule and found something that made his chest tighten. Vanessa Harris, the woman who had just saved his company, was scheduled to work tonight. In 4 hours, she'd be back on the 32nd floor, invisible and unrecognized, cleaning up after people who earned in a day what she made in a year. For the first time in his career, Daniel Roth began to question everything he thought he knew about intelligence, worth, and who deserved a seat at the table. At 11:30 p.m., Vanessa was surprised to find Daniel Roth waiting by the service elevator, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen a CEO look. He traded his usual power suit for jeans and a polo shirt, as if trying to appear less intimidating. "Ms. Harris?" His voice was tentative. "Could we talk? Privately?" Vanessa's first instinct was to run. In her experience, when powerful white men wanted private conversations with black cleaning women, it rarely ended well. But something in his expression, vulnerability mixed with genuine curiosity, made her nod. They met in a small conference room on the 15th floor, away from the executive offices and security cameras. Roth sat across from her, a manila envelope between them. "I know what you did," he said quietly. "The napkin. The algorithm. You saved us." Vanessa kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Roth opened the envelope and pulled out her personnel file. "MIT. Computer Science. You were 3 credits away from graduation when you left. Why?" The question hit harder than she'd expected. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, remembering her father's heart attack, the medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover, her younger brother who needed someone to work while he finished high school. "Life happened," she said simply. Roth pushed a check across the table. Vanessa's eyes widened at the number, $50,000. "This is a bonus for your discretion," Roth said. "Along with a promotion to facilities management. Better pay, regular hours, benefits." Vanessa stared at the check, then slowly pushed it back. "You think this is about money? Isn't it?" Roth looked genuinely confused. "You want to buy my silence. Keep me in the basement where I belong, just with a fancier title." Vanessa's voice was steady, but anger simmered beneath the surface. "You don't want to hear what I have to say. You want to make sure I never say it." Roth's face flushed. "That's not. I'm trying to help you." "No, you're trying to help yourself." Vanessa leaned forward. "Do you know how many times I've had ideas that could have helped this company? How many problems I've watched you struggle with that I could have solved? But nobody sees the black woman with the mop bucket as anything more than furniture." "I'm seeing you now," Roth said weakly. "Only because your back is against the wall." Vanessa's laugh was bitter. "How many other minds are you overlooking? How many Ethan Coles get dismissed because they don't look like your idea of genius? How many women like me never even get through your front door?" The silence stretched between them. Finally, Roth asked, "What do you want?" "I want to be heard. Really heard. Not bought off or hidden away, but given the chance to contribute." Vanessa's voice grew stronger. "I want you to see that intelligence doesn't come with a pedigree. That innovation doesn't require an Ivy League degree. That the people you've been overlooking might be the key to everything you've been missing." The next morning, Ethan Cole knocked on Roth's office door. The young engineer looked nervous but determined. "Sir, about the Phoenix solution," Ethan began. "I think we should involve Ms. Harris in our next development session. Her approach to emotional modeling could revolutionize how we think about AI behavior." Roth studied the young man's face. "You know who she is? I figured it out when I saw the handwriting. She left notes on my whiteboard once when I was working late. I thought it was another engineer." Ethan's cheeks reddened. "I only realized it was her when I compared the mathematical notation." 2 days later, Vanessa found herself in the engineering department's main conference room, surrounded by 7 of the brightest minds in Silicon Valley. She wore her best dress, purchased that morning with money borrowed from her neighbor, and tried to ignore how everyone except Ethan avoided eye contact. Dr. Lena Briggs presided over the meeting with obvious displeasure. "I'm not sure why we're here," she said coldly. "Phoenix is working fine." "It's working," Vanessa said quietly. "But it's not optimized. The emotional weighting is crude. You're treating sentiment like binary data instead of recognizing its complexity." She moved to the whiteboard and began drawing. Neural pathway diagrams flowed from her marker, elegant and precise. Mathematical relationships that showed how human emotions could be quantified, weighted, and predicted with stunning accuracy. "Traditional AI assumes rationality," Vanessa explained, her confidence growing. "But humans make decisions based on fear, hope, trauma, joy, layers of emotional experience that influence every choice." If you can map those emotional patterns, you can predict behavior with unprecedented accuracy. The room fell silent. James Kellerman leaned forward, studying her diagrams. This would require completely rebuilding our base architecture. Not rebuilding, Vanessa corrected. Evolving. Like teaching a computer to think with both logic and intuition. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. It could revolutionize everything from market prediction to social media algorithms to medical diagnosis. Dr. Briggs watched the excited murmurs around the table with growing alarm. For 15 years, she'd been the smartest person in every room. Now a cleaning woman was making her look like an amateur. This is interesting theory, Lena said dismissively. But implementation would be impossible. The computational requirements alone. Actually, Vanessa interrupted gently. I've run the calculations. It's not only possible, it's more efficient than your current system. As the meeting ended and the engineers filed out buzzing with excitement, Lena Briggs remained seated, her jaw clenched. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at a name she hadn't called in months. Marcus Webb. Investigative journalist. Someone who specialized in exposing fraud and corporate scandal. It was time to remind everyone that genius required credentials, and that some people simply didn't belong. The emergency board meeting was called for 9 a.m. sharp. Rothworks' 12-person board of directors filed into the 32nd floor conference room with grim expressions, their usual confidence replaced by barely contained panic. Overnight, 3 major clients had threatened to pull their contracts, spooked by rumors that Project Phoenix was fundamentally flawed. Margaret Chin, the board chair and former Treasury Secretary, didn't waste time with pleasantries. Daniel, we need straight answers. Is Phoenix stable or not? Ross stood at the head of the table, acutely aware that his career hung by a thread. Phoenix is not only stable, it's exceeding all performance metrics. Our predictions are 93% accurate, compared to the industry standard of 68%. Then why? Interrupted board member Thomas Blackwell, a hedge fund titan. Are our clients jumping ship? Why is the Wall Street Journal preparing an exposé about our house of cards technology? Dr. Lena Briggs, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Because the system's foundation is compromised. We've been cutting corners. Using unvetted solutions from questionable sources. Roth's blood ran cold. He'd suspected Lena might try to undermine him, but not like this. What kind of sources? Margaret asked sharply. Before Lena could respond, Roth made a decision that would either save his company or destroy it. I want to bring in the person responsible for Phoenix's breakthrough. She can explain better than anyone. She? Thomas raised an eyebrow. If you'll excuse me for just one moment. Roth stepped outside and returned with Vanessa, who looked composed despite the stares of 12 of America's most powerful business leaders. The silence was deafening. Margaret Chin was the first to recover. Daniel, what exactly is happening here? This is Vanessa Harris, Roth said, his voice steady. She's the architect of Phoenix's emotional modeling system. Vanessa moved to the presentation screen, her hands surprisingly steady as she pulled up her diagrams. Traditional AI tries to predict human behavior by analyzing past patterns, she began, her voice clear and confident. But humans aren't rational actors. We're emotional beings whose decisions are influenced by psychological factors that most algorithms ignore. She clicked to her next slide, a complex neural network diagram that made even the tech-savvy board members lean forward. Phoenix doesn't just process data, it processes emotional context. Fear during market volatility. Optimism during economic growth. The collective psychological state that drives financial decisions. Vanessa's presentation was flawless, her explanations elegant yet accessible. Board member Sarah Williams, former CEO of a Fortune 100 company, asked, "What's your background in AI development?" "I studied computer science at MIT, focusing on behavioral modeling and artificial intelligence," Vanessa replied honestly. "And your degree?" "I didn't finish. Family circumstances required me to leave school." The room's energy shifted. Some board members exchanged glances. Thomas Blackwell looked openly skeptical. "So you're saying," Thomas said slowly, "that our $400 million project is built on ideas from someone without even a bachelor's degree?" "The ideas work," Roth interjected. "Results speak louder than credentials." Vanessa clicked to her final slide, a projection showing how Phoenix could expand beyond financial markets. This emotional modeling framework could revolutionize everything from healthcare diagnostics to urban planning. Imagine AI that understands not just what people do, but why they do it. The applications are limitless. Margaret Chin studied the projections with growing excitement. This could position us as the global leader in empathetic AI. The market potential is enormous. But Dr. Lena Briggs had heard enough. She stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "This is a fraud," she declared, her voice cutting through the room. "This woman has been stealing proprietary information for months. She's a custodial worker who somehow gained access to classified systems. For all we know, she's working for competitors, feeding them our research." Gasps echoed around the table. Vanessa felt the blood drain from her face. "That's absurd," Roth said, but Lena pressed on. "I have security footage of her in restricted areas. Phone records showing suspicious communication patterns. The timing of her breakthrough coincides perfectly with our competitors' sudden advances in emotional AI." Thomas Blackwell looked vindicated. "I knew something was wrong. We're being played." "Check my background," Vanessa said desperately. "Verify my MIT transcripts. Everything I've shown you is original work based on research I started in college. Research that conveniently solves our exact problem?" Lena's voice dripped with sarcasm. "How remarkably convenient." Margaret Chin raised her hand for silence. "These are serious allegations. If Ms. Harris is indeed involved in corporate espionage." "She's not," Ethan Cole's voice rang out from the doorway. The young engineer stood there with a laptop and a stack of papers. "I've been tracking Dr. Briggs' communications for the past week. She's been feeding information to Marcus Webb at the Wall Street Journal, trying to manufacture a scandal." The room erupted. Lena's face went white as Ethan displayed email logs showing her correspondence with the journalist. "She's been sabotaging Phoenix from the beginning," Ethan continued, "suppressing junior talent and taking credit for ideas that weren't hers. Vanessa's approach threatens her position, so she's trying to destroy it." Thomas Blackwell stood up abruptly. "This is a circus. I move to suspend Phoenix indefinitely and conduct a full investigation." "Seconded," called another board member. But Margaret Chin was studying Vanessa's projections again. "Before we make any hasty decisions, I want independent verification of this technology. If Ms. Harris is right about the expansion potential, we're looking at $1 trillion opportunity." The room split down the middle, half wanting to shut down Phoenix immediately, half intrigued by the possibilities Vanessa had presented. As security was called to escort Lena from the building, Vanessa realized that her simple napkin had triggered something much bigger than she'd ever imagined. The battle for Phoenix, and for her future, was just beginning. By 6 p.m. that evening, Marcus Webb's article was live on the Wall Street Journal's website. The headline read, "Genius or Fraud? The cleaning lady who claims to have saved a $400 million tech project." But Webb had underestimated his audience. Within hours, the story exploded across social media, and the narrative quickly shifted from skepticism to outrage, not at Vanessa, but at the system that had kept her invisible. "A black woman cleaning floors while having the solution TOs save the company?" tweeted at Tech Equality, garnering 50,000 retweets in 2 hours. "This is why diversity in tech isn't just morally right, it's profitable," posted LinkedIn influencer David Park, whose post went viral. The hashtag #InvisibleGenius began trending worldwide. Roth watched the media storm from his office, fielding calls from reporters, board members, and advocacy groups. His assistant handed him a tablet showing the flood of responses. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, pulling up a video that had already reached 2 million views. On screen, Dr. Amara Okafor, a prominent AI researcher from Stanford, was being interviewed on CNN. "I've reviewed Ms. Harris's emotional modeling framework," she said. "It's revolutionary. This approach could advance AI development by decades." The fact that she was cleaning floors instead of leading research teams tells us everything we need to know about systemic bias in corporate America. Roth's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Chin. "Emergency board call in 30 minutes. The situation has changed." Meanwhile, in the engineering department, Ethan Cole was digging deeper into Dr. Lena Briggs' files. What he found made his stomach turn. Performance review after performance review showed a pattern. Promising junior engineers, many of them women and minorities, had been systematically rated lower than their white male counterparts despite producing superior work. Innovative ideas had been buried or credited to senior staff. Hiring recommendations had been ignored if they came from non-traditional backgrounds. "She's been gatekeeping for years," Ethan muttered, printing out the evidence. The most damning discovery was a series of emails between Lena and several department heads, explicitly discussing how to maintain team cohesion by limiting disruptive hires, corporate speak for keeping out anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of talent. That evening, as protesters gathered outside Rothworks headquarters carrying signs reading, "Promote Vanessa," and "Clean house, not floors," Roth made the hardest decision of his career. The emergency board meeting lasted 4 hours. When it ended, Lena Briggs was not only fired but facing potential legal action for discrimination and fraud. 3 other senior managers who had participated in the systematic exclusion were also terminated. But the real transformation was just beginning. "We're implementing immediate changes," Roth announced in a company-wide video call the next morning. "Effective today, we're launching the Invisible Genius Initiative, a comprehensive program to identify and develop overlooked talent both within our company and in the broader community." He outlined sweeping reforms, anonymous idea submission systems, skills-based hiring that didn't require traditional degrees, partnerships with community colleges and historically black universities, and mentorship programs for underrepresented groups. "We've been looking for intelligence in all the wrong places," Roth continued, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised even him. "We've confused credentials with capability, pedigree with potential. That ends now." Vanessa watched the broadcast from her small apartment, tears streaming down her face. Her phone had been ringing nonstop with job offers from competing tech companies, interview requests from major news outlets, and messages of support from strangers around the world. But the call that mattered most came from her younger brother Marcus, now a freshman at Howard University studying computer science. "Ness," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you know what you did, right? There are kids like us watching this, seeing someone who looks like them, who came from where we came from, changing everything. You didn't just solve their algorithm problem, you solved the problem of people like us being invisible." 3 days later, Rothworks stock reached an all-time high. The Invisible Genius Initiative had attracted attention from major investors who saw the competitive advantage in tapping previously overlooked talent pools. Tech giants were scrambling to implement similar programs, desperate not to fall behind. But more importantly, applications were pouring in from brilliant minds who had been working retail jobs, driving trucks, cleaning offices, or caring for family members. People whose intelligence had been dismissed because it didn't come wrapped in the right diploma or the right skin color. Ethan Cole, now promoted to lead the initiative's technical development, spent his days reviewing submissions from former MIT dropouts working as baristas, self-taught programmers debugging code for video game companies, and military veterans whose logistics experience translated perfectly to supply chain optimization. "We've only scratched the surface," he told Roth during a weekly update. "There are thousands of Vanessas out there, waiting for someone to see them." As Roth looked out at the bustling engineering floor, now filled with faces that actually reflected the diversity of America, he realized that Vanessa's napkin had done more than save Project Phoenix. It had saved his soul. But the biggest transformation was yet to come. Because Vanessa Harris was no longer content to be just a symbol of change. She was ready to become its architect. 6 months later, Vanessa Harris walked through the glass doors of the Rothworks Innovation Lab, a 15,000 square foot space on the 20th floor that hummed with creative energy. The lab bore little resemblance to the sterile corporate environment upstairs. Colorful murals covered the walls, comfortable couches created informal meeting areas, and the dress code ranged from hoodies to hijabs to military fatigues. "Morning, boss," called out Jerome Washington, a former auto mechanic whose pattern recognition skills had revolutionized the company's supply chain algorithms. He was leading a team meeting with Maria Santos, an undocumented immigrant whose mathematical genius had been discovered while she was working 2 cleaning jobs to support her family. Vanessa smiled, still adjusting to being called boss. She'd never sought power, but she'd learned to wield it strategically. The innovation lab wasn't just about developing technology. It was about dismantling the barriers that kept brilliant minds trapped in circumstances that society deemed lesser. Her first hire had been simple. Every person who applied to Rothworks would have their submissions reviewed by the lab before any traditional HR screening. Skills mattered more than schools. Potential trumped pedigree. The results had been extraordinary. Phoenix 2.0, built entirely by her team of unconventional hires, was processing emotional data with 97% accuracy, a leap that had attracted partnerships with healthcare systems, urban planning departments, and even the Department of Veterans Affairs. The AI could now predict depression episodes before they occurred, identify communities at risk for social unrest, and optimize resource distribution in ways that saved both money and lives. Vanessa, called Dr. Patricia Williams, the lab's head of behavioral research and a former high school guidance counselor who had earned her PhD through night classes while raising 3 kids. "The pilot program results from Detroit are in." Vanessa reviewed the data on Patricia's tablet, her eyes widening. The emotional AI system they'd deployed in Detroit's public health network had identified at-risk youth with 94% accuracy, allowing social workers to intervene before crises escalated. Youth detention rates had dropped 40% in 6 months. "This changes everything," Vanessa whispered. "We're not just predicting behavior, we're preventing tragedy." The lab's impact extended far beyond technology. Vanessa had instituted a radical mentorship program where every new hire was paired with someone from a similar background who had made it in tech. Former gang members mentored kids from tough neighborhoods. Immigrants helped other immigrants navigate corporate culture. Single mothers supported other women juggling careers and family. But perhaps most importantly, the lab had become a recruitment pipeline for other companies. Vanessa took pride in the fact that 30% of her team had been poached by competitors, at salaries triple what they'd earned before joining Rothworks. She'd turned talent development into an industry. "You're destroying our competitive advantage," Roth had joked during their monthly one-on-one meeting. "I'm creating a better industry," Vanessa had replied. "Rising tide lifts all boats." Now, as she walked through the lab observing her team, a former prison guard working on recidivism prediction algorithms, a community college dropout designing more intuitive user interfaces, a retired teacher developing AI tutoring systems, Vanessa felt something she'd never experienced in those late nights cleaning floors: belonging. Her office was modest, with a window overlooking the city where she'd grown up invisible. On her desk sat 2 items: the original napkin, now framed, and a photo of her brother Marcus at his Howard University graduation, where he delivered the valedictorian speech about invisible genius. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel Ross stood in her doorway, looking remarkably relaxed for a man who used to work 18-hour days. "Got a minute?" he asked. They walked to the balcony overlooking the main lab floor. Roth had aged in the past 6 months, but it wasn't the stress aging she'd observed before. This was the natural mellowing of a man who'd finally found perspective. "I'm stepping down as CEO next month," he said quietly. "The board approved my transition to executive chairman. I'll focus on long-term strategy and philanthropy." Vanessa wasn't surprised. She'd watched him evolve from a driven executive to someone who understood that true success couldn't be measured in stock prices alone. "The board wants to know if you'd consider joining the executive team," Roth continued. "Chief Innovation Officer." Full voting rights, equity package, the works. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, watching her team below. Jerome was explaining something to a group of new hires, his hands moving animatedly. Maria was debugging code while her toddler played nearby in the lab's childcare area. Dr. Williams was video calling with a social worker in Detroit, refining their intervention algorithms. I appreciate the offer, Vanessa said finally. But my work is here. Building bridges. Finding the invisible people and making them seen. Roth nodded, unsurprised. I figured you'd say that. But the offer stands. Always. As the afternoon sun slanted through the lab's windows, illuminating faces of every color and background working together to solve humanity's most complex problems, Vanessa reflected on how far she traveled from that night 6 months ago when she'd scribbled equations on a napkin. She'd started as someone society had rendered invisible. Now she spent her days making sure that would never happen to anyone else. The company that had once overlooked her had been rewritten, not just in its code, but in its soul. And Vanessa Harris, who had never sought power, had discovered that the most meaningful power of all was lifting others up. In the end, she hadn't just solved a $400 million problem. She'd solved the problem of wasted human potential, one brilliant mind at a time.